$25 a foot. And the way we did it was scavenging. It's funny, I was born in Florida to a family that had, escaped New York City and moved the whole family to Florida, in the late 1950s.
Wow.
And lived in a trailer there for a few years until they built a house. And it was, a different era when things were much more mobile. So by the time I came along, they were very settled in a suburban area of Tampa. And that's more or less where I grew up. So I got out as soon as I could. I went to New York and never looked back.
I was going to say your family escaped from New York to Florida, and then you escaped from Florida back to New York.
Yep. Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah.
I think especially, from Florida to New York was pretty common after COVID. But so when you were a kid, did you have any, parents, uncles, aunts, anyone who was an architect or designer? Is that how...
Not at all. In the construction industry, my dad was a contractor. He was an electrical contractor. And my brother's an engineer. So, there's that kind of technical aspect floating around. But I was always into more creative things. I loved building models. And I think that's probably what led to being an architect, honestly. I used to build models of all kinds of things, scratch build. And, I saw a career out there when I was younger, like, hey, I can build models for a living. And that's where architecture came from. But I also made a lot of films. And that's when I was my entire youth, I thought that's what I would become as a filmmaker. Wow. So I had a Super 8 camera and a whole editing studio. And my parents were very tolerant. We turned the whole garage into a special effects studio. It had black velvet on the walls. It had rigs on the ceiling. Really? And used to do lots of sci-fi films, basically, and added soundtracks and did ADR, the whole thing. Wow. And I really thought that's what I would go into. And I, when I got, into college, it was not, especially when you're in Florida, the University of Florida, it wasn't really much of an option to go into film. So I went out to USC, looked at the film school there, and ended up drifting back into architecture because I saw there were a lot of parallels. There are a lot of parallels. You can kind of create a spatial narrative as you're walking through a building, and the parts of film that I really loved, which were the building models and shooting them and photographing them and creating sense of proceeding through spaces, you can get with architecture. And it was more of a career choice. It wasn't like trying to get into the NBA where you have a tiny shot at making it to the top. It's like in architecture, it seemed more realistic at the time. And
at the time,
it just led from there.
Yeah.
I'm actually glad I didn't get into the pigeonhole of special effects industry stuff because that would have been brutal.
Yeah.
I think those folks are in the grind, and they're just. It seems like these days, even with the big budget movies, they're just kind of squished down and said, just do more, cheaper, and work longer. It sounds like a brutal place to be.
Oh, it does. When it went from being, actual physical models and shooting those, which seemed fun, to computer, it seems just taking a turn toward the miserable. So.
Yeah.
I don't want to offend anyone in the special effects industry out there, though. So,
I'm kind of curious. So, at what age were you working and creating stuff in the garage? What was special effects like at that time? Was it less?
Yeah, I'm old, so I am actually 61 years old. So
you're kidding me? You're in the middle of your architecture career.
But it's at the time I was doing it. It was age say 12 through college. It was very different. You had a Super 8 camera, and you got these little cartridges that had 50 feet of film in them from Kodak, and you shot them. And I had saved up for the most elaborate Super 8 camera you could buy there, which did something unusual. It could backwind the film in the cartridge, so you can do double exposures and triple exposures and all that. And that's the only way you could do special effects. So you shot a spaceship against black velvet, and then you'd do a star field, and you'd superimpose that, and you'd put multiple layers together right in the camera, and then had an editing studio where I'd clothespins on a line and hung strips of film and put them all together. It was elaborate. It was and it was a lot of fun. So it was a company called Spectrum Films. Had business cards made up.
Oh,
even.
really?
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's so
Wait, so
funny.
did you do it just as a hobby, or did you do it professionally for a bit, like actually get paid to?
No, I never got paid. It was a hobby.
Okay.
But I had it was, if you've seen the film, the Fabelmans, the Steven Spielberg film, we had a group of kids in high school that were kind of the performing troupe, and used to work with them over and over again. So it was kind of like that. That film was really hit home when it was,
Yeah.
exactly what my youth was like. It wasn't nearly as elaborate as he was able to do, but anyway, it was fun.
Do you still have those films?
In a box somewhere. Yeah. Someday I'll get them digitized and be able to watch them again, because trying to find a Super 8 projector is not easy now.
Sure, that would be actually really cool though to see those things.
It would be fun. Yeah.
So you're in high school. You think you're going to film. You go to USC. You tour. And was it during that time when you were looking at colleges and whatnot that you found architecture and that was going to be the thing that you studied, or what was the trend?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's like during that time also, out of high school, I had like an internship job at an architecture firm. So I was getting, the feel for architecture at that time as well. And even when I was doing architecture in college, undergraduate, I still wanted to parlay that into a production design career more than an architecture career. So I put together a portfolio of things and sent it to various people in LA. The one I got the best response was from, believe it or not, David Lynch's office.
Wow.
I never got to talk to him personally, but his secretary was very nice and called me and said, "Oh, Mr. Lynch reviewed your portfolio and really liked it. We don't have need for anyone right now," that kind of thing. So it was fun. I still have that portfolio around. It was fun. I did a whole, basically a storyboard, but in photographs of a film, called Boomtown. And similarly, I shot it all, the models, everything else in black and white, and put it together in a book form and sent that out.
Wow.
So even at that time, I was still thinking of film, and I had the choice of, out of college, going to LA or New York. I decided to go to New York, and to get into the film industry, that was not a good choice at the time because there were no films being made in New York.
Yeah.
There were a few companies doing these sort of motion graphics for the openings of TV shows, and I got a job at one of those called Filigree Films. And they were using big Oxbury animation stands. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these. They're gigantic, and they have a big rail that goes up 25 feet. And you would put cells on a platform that were backlit, and the camera would, move an inch and take a photo, move an inch and take a photo. And it was pretty grueling as well, as you're in a dark room all day with this camera barely moving and having to rudimentary doing programs on this kind of thing. So I got into architecture kind of at the time. I was like, I don't really like this. And I had a friend who was working at Cohn Pedersen Fox in New York at the time, and he's like, send me your portfolio. And he showed it to Bill Pedersen, and they made an offer. And it was a really good offer, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try architecture for a while. So I got in and never left.
That's amazing. So what school did you go to?
Well, I went to University of Florida for undergraduate, and then after working at Cohn Pedersen Fox for about 4 years, I went to grad school at Yale.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What was it like at KPF?
At the time, it was kind of fun. It wasn't that big a firm at the time. It was maybe 150 people.
Wow.
So comparatively, and their office was in great location. It was the Steinway building that is now that giant shop tower that's one of the tallest in New York. But it had Steinway piano showroom in the ground floor, and you'd go up, and they were on a couple floors above that. And it was little studios. The firm was broken into tiny studios. So you had a team of 4 or 5 people working on a tall building. And you were, the expectation of work back then was really different. You were expected to stay there, as long as you possibly could. And it was a competition to see how long you could stay there.
Yeah.
So people were sleeping on the floor. The typical work week was 7 days a week. You got part of the day off on Saturday to go to a movie or whatever, but you were expected to be there all the time. Yeah, it was brutal, but it was a competition. New people would come in and they would work, and they would start to leave at 6 o'clock or whatever, and everybody would be like, "Nah, they're not going to make it."
You don't know. You don't know.
But it was fun. You definitely were a part of a team, and I guess it was like being in the military in a way.
Yeah.
You were in there with your troops, and I got to do a lot. I was on a building in Sydney, and our whole team got sent to Sydney for a year. That was a great experience. And worked on a building in Jakarta, and it was great training.
I'm guessing mostly large buildings, towers, or something.
All tall buildings. Yeah. All tall buildings. And when you're on a team of doing tall buildings, you get pigeonholed into your specialty on that building. There was the curtain wall guy, and I got mostly core. So
fun.
it was doing all these intricate, like, HVAC routing diagrams and working all this stuff around each other. So it definitely was good training for later of doing your own project.
Yeah. And BIM was probably not a thing then too, right? It was just like...
It was hand-drawn when I was there. The computers were just starting to come in, and they had these massive consoles with 8 monitors on them, that were hand-built by some company. I don't even remember the name of the company, but we were still doing hand drawings, and renderings were done with Prismacolor pencils over prints. So it was
Do you miss that method of working?
Absolutely. I really do. I still draw to start, any project with sketch on trace. But because you actually maybe, and you probably do this similarly in other, formats on computer, but that time you use to draw a line, you're actually thinking a lot about the design during that process. So it was kind of a meditative process where the design was refining itself in your head while you were drawing all these lines and things. So it was nice. I do miss it. And I miss the technique. I look back now at some of those old drawings that I kept, and I was like, man, I could draw back then. I couldn't do that now. It's like, doing these pencil lines with, heavying up the ends of the end points of the lines and all that kind of stuff. It's like, woo, I was pretty good.
Who did that? Yeah. I think it's obviously changed a lot, but we asked that question fairly often on the show, and sometimes in the past, I used to wonder if it's a bit of a generational difference, and there's some of that for sure. But I think also it's not. I think it's just a physiological, connection you have when you're drawing and you're doodling or whatever you're creating. Like you said, you're actually thinking while you're doing it, and there's a different kind of cognitive response in the action. As in the computer, it's very like. I mean, if you have an iPad and a stylus, that's closer to drawing. But if you're on a traditional computer, it's more like click, click, point, click, click, open menu, and it's not. It's just I don't know. You don't have that same kind of meditative state or whatever you said.
Yeah, no, it is different. And building models is a similar kind of thing. Cutting cardboard all day doesn't sound like fun, but it really was. You were thinking through it as you built it, and it always amazes me. Now you have clients who their expectations are just that you're going to produce a rendering of every square inch of every project. We do 400 or 500 renderings on some projects. Just, I want to see that, place where my toothbrush is going to be stored in a full color, photorealistic rendering, please. And you're like, okay, we'll show you that. But to think that people were building these massive projects based on a cardboard model, and that's all they got to see before it went into construction is like, wow, there was a lot of more trust in the architect, I think, then. So it's like,
but I still feel like there is more magic and more risk for sure. Like you're betting that it's going to turn out good because you don't really know what it's going to look like. But at the end, I think you're also probably more surprised and appreciative of the end result because you just imagine it in your head and that was it. Like, showing all those renderings nowadays, it's cool because at least the client knows what things are going to look like. But in the same time, I think we're kind of like losing some of that magic.
It's true. And I always wonder if people back then, they saw a model, but they didn't really know what and a plan, and they couldn't really tell what it was until it was finished. And if there were disappointed clients that showed up at their house and going, whoa, I had no idea this is what I was getting.
I'm sure it happened.
Because now it's so identical, you can't tell the difference really between a photo and a rendering. So they know what they're getting beforehand. It's surprising. You still find some clients, though, that it's exactly like the rendering, and they're still like, I didn't know that was going to be there. And it's like, really? It's right there in the rendering.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. You just forgot.
We actually had clients who commented to us not long ago, and they were like, oh yeah, when you did like our bathroom, like the rendering you showed us was exactly what it is now. And we're like, yeah.
That's a good thing.
And they were amazed by it. They were like, yeah, well, when we make choices, usually they're the ones that we want to move forward with. So
I do think that it's also practicing today when clients ask for the 50 or 100 renderings. One, depending on how you're doing the renderings, that could be very expensive for somebody, either the client or the architect. And it also, I think, sometimes makes the clients almost too involved, depending on the personality and the project, to become too not micromanaging, but just too involved in every nook and cranny. And I feel like, going back to the magic idea, there needs to be a little bit of like space, just
But
a little bit of.
I think all of that, I'm gonna sound like an old lady, but I feel like a lot of that comes again from like the internet, kind of like explaining and telling everybody like what everything is and people wanting to know and all of that. I think like back in the day when none of that existed, you wouldn't expect to know, what
To the
those
nth
things were.
degree.
Yeah. You just trust the
thresholders.
expert,
Yeah.
right?
No, that's exactly true. It's true. They want to see absolutely every choice and comment on every choice. So, and it is. It's a you see it in doctors a lot, constantly complaining that your patients come to them with having already diagnosed whatever they have, and they've seen it on the internet. Yeah. So, I think it's the same thing. It's just the role of the expert has diminished considerably.
Interesting. So you're at KPF 4 years. That's a good stint.
Yep.
Why move on from KPF?
Well, I always knew I wanted to end up going back to grad school, and it was just at the point when the economy started to take a downturn, and the writing was on the wall that that a recession was about to hit, and I was like, this is a great time. So I sent out my portfolios and got accepted, and that was a perfect time to get into grad school. And the timing was good because right after I got out of grad school, the economy was back on the up track, and so there were jobs out there.
Did you decide to go to grad school because you had a 4-year degree, or was there more of an academic?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it was a 4-year degree, and certain schools are great for undergraduate, and you're not the strongest in graduate school, so that's why I wanted to make the switch too.
What was Yale like?
What was Yale like? It was great. It was 40 people in your class, and so you got to know everybody really, really well. And we were in that Paul Rudolph building before it had been renovated, so it was a mess, but a great, chaotic, creative mess. And it was the same old thing. It was the same as undergraduate at the time. People sleeping on the floors and working all hours of the day and night, and it was a good time to be there. I think. It was just a hive of creativity, and everybody had. The great thing about Yale, I think, and why I chose it really was that it was known for producing smaller practitioners when they got out. It wasn't a feeder school for corporate firms or anything like that. And I kind of knew I wanted to do my own thing, and everybody there had their own crazy vision. So, there was one guy there who was just obsessed with aluminum, and he used to make styrofoam models of everything and take it to a foundry in town and have it cast in aluminum. So all their models were aluminum. And so everybody had those quirks. And I think that's what made it a great school. I don't know what it's like there anymore, but at the time it was good.
Do you know what your quirk was?
My quirk? I don't know. I came into school, to grad school, with a lot more experience than most people had. So it was kind of a situation where, there were people who had lots of architecture background, and there were people who came from other degree programs, undergraduate, and had no architecture background. So being one of the ones who had more, you had, kind of a leg up, but you're also kind of in there, helping other people, get the hang of what's going on. So kind of, being somebody that could answer questions about a lot of things, that was a thing. But I also tended to do, I would say, more out there projects, I guess. I remember specifically a studio by Daniel Liebeskind, and he was kind of open to anything. And I ended up doing a project at JFK Airport, and I built a model of the whole airport and built this massive blimp that was a vertical blimp, like a tower, and I hung the model from the ceiling, and the blimp thing hung down, and I had a whole group of people choreographing this dance where strings would pull it. It was like a marionette, but an airship as well, kind of thing. I can't imagine many other schools that would let you get away with that kind of stuff.
That's really cool, though. That's really cool.
But yeah, it was fun.
Do you
still do that for client presentation nowadays?
Dances.
That would be fun.
Well, actually, that's kind of the question I was going to ask is, I think like something so obviously we're architects and we went to school for architecture, and school tends to be, depending on where you go, but it can be quite conceptual, like you described. Like in the schools I went to, I saw or participated in the same level of conceptual, architecture. And I think it's interesting the gap between that type of architecture versus what most of us do in practice, and maybe even more so what clients perceive of architects doing. And so I guess my question is, like for a layperson who's not an architect, they'd probably wonder, well, how does a floating blimp above JFK, a choreographed dance, how does that have anything to do with the real world architecture? And how does that, maybe more specifically, how did that inform you as an architect? Does that even matter? Does that inform, when you're deciding to design a house, you're considering floating blimps? Like, how do those two things connect? I'm asking as a layperson.
It really is an interesting thing that, if you go to medical school, people expect you to come out and know what the hell you're doing when you're, going into surgery or something like that. The process is that it relies on a lot of technical skill being taught in school and then through your internship program as well. But architecture is exactly the opposite. Like, you don't learn anything technical in school at all. And, you come out, and I think, honestly, in early practice, you have to be very lucky, because you can screw up a lot of things that get you in major lawsuits. And I've seen it happen too, where someone will hire a young architect. The one that I'm thinking of in particular, there was a house in Austin where whoever built it was a very young architect, and they ran the subfloor on the second floor from the interior straight out to an exterior deck, and just put decking boards over the same subfloor that goes to the interior. No waterproofing break, nothing. And I could see in school, you're building these models or drawing things up, and it looks perfectly reasonable, but nobody taught you that you don't do things this way, and it's going to lead to lawsuits and collapses and things like that. So it is a little shocking there's not more technical, teaching in school in general. But it was always the case that, when you get out, you're supposed to learn all that while you're working as an intern. And hopefully you have the right experience to be able to do that without, being sued or destroying your career along the way. And I guess it's still that way. It is kind of surprising to me.
I think it's still that way for the most part. Did you find that those types of more academic projects helped you as an architect before or now in the design thinking of things? Because it's a radically different type of it would seem very different on paper, right? These kinds of projects versus a house that has to stand and has waterproofing details and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I do think it opens you up to other things, because you can go into architecture and, not having seen much architecture, you think, this is what it is. It's a house or something, and it's a house form, and maybe you saw a modern piece of architecture once or twice, but it is opening up the possibilities, and I think there's a huge value in that as well. It also depends on what school you go to. I think I had the luck. It was only luck because I went to University of Florida because my family lived in Florida at the time. But at the time, the undergraduate school was run by a bunch of Mies acolytes. And one of the major ones, they had a special class. They would take you and sit you down and say, all right, we're all going to learn reveal and negative detailing this week. And so it was the idea of, you have one material meets another, there has to be a reveal between it, and there has to be a logic to how the reveals meet each other, and it's a way to express materials coming together, and the structure could be. So it was this whole very, very worked out systematic process of how a building's supposed to work, and it came from Mies and modified. And but the fact that I had that background of learning all of that stuff, I think was super valuable carrying through to, everything I did since then. Because, you see sometimes people don't take that into consideration, and that's where you kind of get messy details and things like that. So I really do appreciate that. And then Yale was the opposite. It was sort of like, do whatever, and you can do what looks great, but there was no thought put towards detailing and structure and things like that. So I think the combination of the two worked out really well.
You said Libeskind was a professor?
Yeah, he was a visiting professor.
Interesting.
And I ended up working for him after school for on several projects.
What was that like?
Yeah. It was interesting. I was on the World Trade Center competition, the one that ended up winning, and then we did a redevelopment of Alexanderplatz in Berlin.
Wow.
Got to live in Berlin during that process, so that was fun. And yeah, I don't. It's not my way of working anymore. So there was a disjunction in that. I think he was the one I did that blimp weird project for in grad school.
Mhm.
He liked that, but when it came down to actually doing real work, that is that discrepancy between the theoretical and then how it translates to actual built work. And I think, in a lot of well-known architects' projects, some of them focus on detailing and how things come together, and some don't. And you can see the difference there, where the grand idea is what you sell, and then when it comes down to how it actually comes together, it doesn't really work a lot of times. So
yeah. There's I agree with that. It's
a
like
gap that needs to be bridged.
You can tell there's like a napkin sketch or a big, like you said, a big idea, and then the mentality in the office is we'll just figure it out later on, or not even we, someone else in the office will figure it out and just figure it out. And I don't care.
Right. No, that's exactly. It's and it drives me crazy, those kind of projects. So I can't deal with it.
So did you work at any other offices before starting your own practice?
Yeah, at the time, right after grad school, I didn't really go to work for an office per se in any real sense. I was always wanted to make sure, and this is maybe a lack of commitment of some sort, but I wanted to kind of freelance for various architects. So I worked for Deborah Burke's office and worked on some great projects for her when she was a tiny office. At the time, it was 5 people, so that was fun. And Libeskind, as I mentioned, and I did some other freelance work for other architects in town, and then during that time, I was also with my partner and wife at the time, Louise Hartman. We were getting very, very small projects, so things like in a brownstone, renovating one bedroom to put a desk and a radiator cover in. That was an early project, or not enough to live on by any means, but I could do both at the same time. I could work for these other people and didn't have a 9-to-5 schedule, so I could do their projects, and then at night we'd do these other projects, and slowly built from there. It really was a case of starting off not with a bang, but with the tiniest projects you can imagine, and working our way up.
For those tiny projects, obviously you took them on. Were you, marketing is maybe not the right word, but were you letting people know that you were, an architect looking for work, or they just come your way? And also, was there ever a point when someone's asked you and said, okay, you're an architect, right? Scott, you're an architect, and I have this bedroom remodel. Can you do it? And do you ever think no, that's not really, because you had done towers at KPF, right? And you worked with Daniel Libeskind and whatever else. Do you ever think no, that's not what I do. I don't do covers for heaters. You know what I mean?
No, very low ego.
Good for you.
Time, at least.
Good for you.
It's no, you put the same energy into designing a radiator cover, quite honestly, that you do a tower, and we went overboard, I'm sure, in designing these things, but it's all you had. It's what you had, and you want to be proud of it. But we did early on. There was this idea of everything you do, you photographed. You just didn't let it go and say that's too small to photograph. So it was starting early of thinking about things like that, of how to show your work and be proud of what you do. So we photographed those radiators and a desk here and that, and then it comes in useful. And there's, again, the element of luck can't be overstated, is that, and some connections, because it was one of Louise's friends worked at a film company called Good Machine. It was a producer. They did independent films. And this person knew they were looking for a new office in New York. And they had already talked to 2 or 3 architects, and they were coming in at numbers that they thought were outrageous for build-outs for the interior. So, and the outrageous numbers were $80 a square foot at the time. So this friend just said to, the owner of the company was like, hey, why don't you give my friends a shot? They might be able to do something that's a lot cheaper and cool. And that was probably our big break. And we ended up doing their offices for $25 a square foot.
Construction cost?
Hard to imagine. What's
Construction cost or fee?
Construction costs.
Wow.
$25 a foot. And the way we did it was scavenging. We went to, it was in Soho at the time. There was a place called B&H Industrial Shelving. And what they did, they went to old warehouses that were closing down, and they took their metal shelving systems, disassembled them, and would sell them off really cheaply. And we're like, that's what we're doing. We're building walls out of that. And we put, plastic and masonite and perforated metal and other things that we found on Canal Street on the back of those and made offices out of them. So the whole office, was scavenged more or less. And friends were the ones who built it. There was a small contractor, guy who wanted to get into contracting at the time and took it on with his friends to build it. And that led to a lot of things because they were well connected. And we photographed that, and it got published, believe it or not, in Interior Design magazine, which at the time was doing, it's not like it is now. It was less competitive, and they would publish weird little projects like our office, and that led to a lot of things. The timing was good, too. It was right when the dot-com boom was starting to happen, and there were a lot of little companies in New York looking for very cheap but creative office space, and so that led to a lot of different projects from there.
Fascinating. We're going to have to get some photographs of that first project because I don't think I've seen it, but it sounds...
That's not on our website.
It sounds really cool.
You should keep it on there.
It got rolled off our website long ago.
I suppose.
Just make a secret page on the website.
It's like a speakeasy. That's not a bad idea. You need a special passcode to get into the hidden projects.
A white square in the white back where someone clicks on there by accident. That's not a bad idea. So
don't steal it. I trademarked that now. So.
No, see, it's on the podcast, so anyone can do it. What was I going to ask? So it led to other projects, and so you were in New York. So how long? So then, when you transitioned to doing more of your own work, did you stay in New York for a period of time doing that? Was it mostly offices?
Yeah, we did. We were in New York a very long time, 20 years in New York.
Oh, really?
And even when coming to Austin, I was back and forth to New York, up until like 2015 or 16. I was going back and forth every week.
Oh.
So we had both offices going for a long time. And it's only fairly recently that we, consolidated in Austin and just do work all over the country from here. So... and it started off almost exclusively offices, but led to residential through some of those clients who we built their office. They also wanted, their apartment renovated. So we took that on as well and kind of slowly transitioned. We still do a lot of office work. There isn't that much out there right now. But up until recently, we were doing Indeed.com. We were kind of their on-call design architects, and so we were doing a lot of offices for them, and we still do a little of everything. The economy changes, and there'll be a preponderance of houses for a while, and then suddenly everything shifts, and there's nothing out there other than university buildings. Let's say they're the ones spending the money. So I think you have to be a little flexible.
Yeah, and doing different typologies, I think, is a very smart thing to do because of the fluctuation of the economy and the market in general. How did the Austin branch start?
Well, that was my Louise Hartman at the time. She was just offered. She was doing a lot of teaching at Yale while our practice was going in New York. And she was found by the University of Texas School of Architecture and was offered a deanship to be one of the undergraduate deans at the School of Architecture. And we were like, never been to Austin, Texas. And we're like, okay, well, it's an interesting idea. Let's see what we can do. And she came out, and we both came out, and she liked the school and what they were saying, and the job came with tenure. So
that's nice.
We said, let's do it. And the plan was that I would just fly back and forth we'd still have an office there. And, we had certain people on staff that were more senior and could run the office. And so it was a lot of back and forth, and really didn't do many projects in Austin, only very small things to start off here. And built our way up again in Austin while we were doing projects in New York.
Wait, so your partner was an architect? Is an architect?
Yeah, we were in the same. We met in grad school.
Oh, okay.
So we were in the same class. Yeah, and she now teaches at Gallatin School at NYU.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So the early practice was the two of you working together, or was it mostly you and she was doing teaching?
It was kind of a mix. I think I was more into the technical and design aspects, and she was more teaching, and we'd comment and work on all the projects though together. So, and we got up to a pretty large staff in New York. It was up to 10, 12 people.
Okay.
At that time, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
So it was actually a big risk to come to Austin at the time, and Austin was nothing at the time. It hadn't gone through this big tech boom kind of thing.
So when did the transition from New York to Austin occur? When did you know it was the right time to fully move, in quotes, to Austin with your team and all of that?
It was kind of following the work. We started to, it became harder, I guess, to pay attention to what was going on in New York as much. And the number of projects, we were less interested in the time in doing interiors, which is a lot of what you do in New York. The place is built for the most part. Yeah. And so you're renovating interior spaces. So there was a real desire to do freestanding projects. And Austin was a place where, in the region at least, that was on offer. So it became more interesting and exciting to do projects there. And we focused on that, doing more projects out here. So we still do a lot of work in the Northeast, though. Yeah. So it was, again, a slow transition.
And so how big is the office now? I mean, how many employees?
We are 8 or 9 people. Okay. I should know, but it's a good.
Depends on the day.
It's a good size, honestly. Yeah. I'm really, really happy with that size. We've been bigger and smaller, and that size is sort of one of these breaking points where you transition into the next phase up of having more employees, and the demand for getting new projects coming in overrides the amount of time you can spend on design, and it gets into a whole different level of needing management and business development and everything. Whereas this size, we can handle all that and still have a hand in every project, and it just feels right. I think there's always this desire to grow, but people don't really look at the implications of that growing. It's like, do you really get more out of it? Do you a lot of times don't make more money because you have the staff to pay the whole time, and so. I think there are these inflection points. There's like 8 people and then maybe 25 people, and then you go up from there where it gets to a good point where it makes sense, and then you try to go above that, and it's a struggle to get through that next, to that next phase up.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think also there is this idea that success has to do with numbers, and the bigger it is, the more successful you are. But I think, in what we do, it's more about finding the right balance, like you were saying. I mean, if you're just constantly hunting for work to keep that machine going, is that being successful? Like you kind of lost everything that got you into the industry in the first place. So what are you doing?
That happens so much. Yeah, I think in every industry, I think that you get into it for one reason, a love of something, and then you end up doing something completely different. And so it's a hard thing to fight to maintain the things you love about it and keep those going.
I know Rem Koolhaas gave a lecture years and years ago, and he said something to the effect of, the more and this was when, and it was years ago, but at that point he was still, a mega star. It wasn't, early on in his career. And he said basically to the audience, which is I think a group of architects or architecture students, that he said it was funny because the more successful I become as an architect by everyone else's definition of the outside world and what they see, the less architecture I actually do. Meaning I don't actually design a whole lot anymore. Yeah. I'm just tease the face, and it's understandable, but it's an odd thing. And like you said, a lot of architects are in that same position at some point. They're like, wait, what am I doing? I don't even get to draw anything anymore. Meanwhile, it's an odd thing because I do think a lot of clients still maybe falsely, believe that architect is the one doing the work. It's like, nah, now they're not doing the work. They have a bunch of
They'll
staff.
come to the first meeting and that'll be it. So it's funny. I took a tour of Frank Gehry's office with someone that I knew there for a while, and hearing that work process described was fascinating because he had a big office or has a big office, but his process, and I'm not sure it's still this way, but at the way it was described to me, it was like everybody be working like crazy on these big models and everything else, and then at lunchtime, everyone had to clear out of the office. And Frank would only meet with his senior designers and talk about the project, and then he'd go back in his office and everybody else could come again. So he sort of made his comment on everything, but no one else could be around when that happened. So
Interesting.
it's a very interesting.
No argument.
Yeah, that's true.
There's no conversation to have. So.
That's true. So it's cool. So it sounds like actually in the course of your office's life, you've done a lot of different types of work. And so one of the questions I also had written down before we started recording was, when you work at an office like KPF and you're doing large scale work, you're focusing on towers and HVAC, conflict avoidance and all this coordination. Offices are sort of parallel, but then you zoom to the other end of the spectrum in a sense, and now we're talking about houses. Is that like, do those two sides of the brain, or do those two types of working inform each other, or is the core design and that ability really just very different from designing a house?
I don't think it's ever really different, honestly. I think that you use all of those things you've learned before, and they kind of inform you. Like, for instance, doing a house, a lot of times a thing that gets forgotten, and it gets very technical, is doing, how is the air conditioning ducting routed? It is.
Yeah,
it's like, and it can kill the architecture. I've been in so many houses where they don't think about it, and it goes in after, and there's some sort of dumb soffit drop down. So because they forgot how to put, or even worse, you see this a whole lot, which is a beautifully designed building, and then sitting on the roof is some sort of giant chiller system that that it wasn't thought about, and they Photoshop it out for their photos or something. And so you might think that doesn't have a lot to do with design, but it really does. And you were in the nitty gritty of inches between an insulated duct and a column or something like that with fire spray on it. You had to think about that, and it stays in your brain. So when we think about doing a reflected ceiling plan with lighting layouts and how that can interact with truss layouts and how the ducting goes through and everything, that's something that we do right up front. And so think about that kind of coordination. I think it produces a way better project just spatially. So I don't think those things you learn along the way ever go. And I think people that have other odd experiences, before going into architecture, it helps. Honestly, a lot of those things can get brought into the architecture and make it richer and maybe work better.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Okay.
Do you guys use BIM?
Yes, we're Revit pretty much exclusively.
Yeah, and we use ArchiCAD, but it's BIM, and it is weird to think that there's a lot of downsides to it. Any BIM software, because they're quite heavy and intense, but there's a lot of huge upsides, like coordination, like we're talking about. And I'm trying to imagine. So when I started practicing, everything was in the computer. In school, there's still hand-drawn stuff, but in practice, everything's in the computer aside from concept sketches.
Right.
And I just can't imagine doing that kind of coordination by hand on hand-drawn. Yeah.
I did see
it was intense.
I did see on a 20-story tower just in AutoCAD, like 2D, no 3D.
Yeah.
And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, we should move into 3D. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's too many.
Well, imagine it in pencil on paper.
Yeah,
seriously,
right.
It was crazy. The electric eraser was out a lot. And, it was. Yeah, I still have you think back and you see that, like, the Saturn V rocket was designed with people on drafting tables, in big rows. And how the hell did they coordinate that by hand and paper? And I think a lot of it was also that the builders at the time just had a lot more experience with, how to coordinate these things themselves. And a lot was taken. You look at some of those really, let's say Mick and Mead and White drawings of that incredible ornament. A lot of times it was just a 2D elevation drawing. That's it. Yeah. And the craftsman was expected to give it its depth and know what to do. So, that's gone now. Now you have to tell everyone exactly what to do. And where to put it, or else they won't do it because they're afraid of getting blamed for something. So it's it puts a lot more on the architect for sure. There's almost an expectation in the legal sense of the builder not knowing anything, and if it's not in the drawings correctly, you're blamed. You're pointed fingers at. So
I think that's a really interesting observation, and it's true. And I don't know if we talked about it before, but I've often had that theory because I've seen construction document sets from back in the day of some of the significant works of architecture we all admire. And I've seen the CD sets. I'm like, by today's standards, these are not CD sets. These are like schematic design drawings. And so as much as I love this piece of architecture, I'm also thinking, but they did 1/10 of the work that we have to do now. For the CDs, it's so much work. And I'm not saying it should be any other way necessarily, but it is completely different, especially when we model stuff, the project in 3D in the computer, like everything aligns to the 1/8 of an inch. And it just was not the case before. Like it was figured out. And I agree, the builders must have been much more savvy or just understood the true assignment, as opposed to now. It's an odd. So actually, since your career spans at the time that it did and has, do you sometimes wish like our construction document sets did not have to be so intense, and that we could just have builders who just understood what we're going for and not to,
Well, it is nice. I mean, we now make it a point. We even put it in our contracts at this point that the builder, it has to be somebody that we have at least interviewed and looked at their work and approve of in some way. Otherwise, we have the right to back out of our contracts because we have been burned by people, having a beautiful set of drawings and then hiring someone who offered, a build price that's $100,000 less than the person we recommend, and they take them, and it ends up always being a nightmare because we end up holding their hand. It takes 10 times as much longer on our part to get something to come out right. So it's just not worth it. And the best builders we found are people who are trained as architects. A lot of them go into construction, and you'll find contractors who are architects, and they know what you're looking for. You don't have to explain everything, or they're not confused by it and suggesting, oh, let's just put a molding here or something, something like that. It's like they know better than to do that. So the choice of contractor now makes a massive difference. And to what you were saying before about the drawing, one of the most fascinating experiences I had was when I was doing that project at JFK Airport back in grad school. I was able to get into the Port Authority offices, which was in the World Trade Center at the time in New York, and went up to their offices, and they let me look at their archives, which were microfilmed, and they had every sheet of construction drawings of the TWA terminal by Sarnian. And I was blown away by those drawings because they are like pieces of abstract art. They had very few dimensions on them, just a radius from this point, and that's it. And, lots and lots and lots of sections with beautiful, wing-like structures, but almost no information on them. And so the builders just had to take that and go with it. And you go out there, and it's if you look at that building closely, it's amazing that it's, the formwork was done by hand out of wood lathing, and the impression of that wood lathing doing all these crazy compound curves is still in the concrete. And you can just see how craftsmen, they had to know how to do that. I can't imagine anyone knowing how to build, bend wood in those kind of shapes anymore and have it look like anything. So it was an amazing, abstract drawings, and then craftsmen who just knew their stuff, and you got a great building out of it.
It's interesting. My listeners probably are surprised. I'm always arguing for like more robust CD sets because on our side, and I'm sure you've come across this too, when clients are talking with different architects and one architect's fee, like the contractors, is higher than the other, a lot of times it's because the architect who's stupidly low in their price. It's not necessarily because they're a young, hungry architect. It's because they're a seasoned architect in age, but they're just not actually doing the amount of drawings that we would typically do for a custom house. But I also see like the upside for us mostly to not have to do so much drawing.
Well, we detail everything now. Our sets, we're doing a house right now. It's about a 600-page set of drawings, and we detail absolutely every inch, because if you don't, then there's the argument that it wasn't in the drawings. So, you have to. You're forced to. And we, like at initial meetings, we like to have those drawings that we get mini sets printed and we have them out just to show what you get for your money, because it's true. You can do a filing set that is 7 pages for anything, and you can call that a day. And and so there's a big difference, and it is hard to explain to clients the difference there. It really is. Some clients.
Yeah.
Some clients get it immediately, but some don't.
I think that's a good call to have a printed set. We oftentimes, now we're talking about like behind the scenes stuff, but when we're talking to clients, we'll show them like a digital set, but I think a printed set would probably feel different. They can feel the weight.
It does.
Here's a 10-pound set. You see what I'm talking about?
It truly is. Yeah. It's like, here's my 6,000-page novel that I did, and you plunk it on the table, and it's a bit different than showing them a Kindle version.
Yeah. So, of all the different types of projects you've done and you do, is there one type that you love more than others?
Honestly, no. I do think it comes down to the client and what they're willing to let you do or what they expect. I think, the best clients are ones that are allowed like a little freedom to run a bit with your ideas and appreciate that. So yeah, no, it really doesn't. The topology doesn't really matter. You can do beautiful things with not much or with a lot. I always say that's like we do very large houses and we do tiny things like the house I'm living in right now, and you get as much joy out of either type. And it really, I don't really think it's tied to any specific typology.
So you mentioned you kind of like groundbreaking project in New York, right? That little office that you worked on. Was there a similar project for you in Austin once you relocated there? That kind of like shoot you off, in space and actually like launch the whole office there?
Kind of. Believe it or not, it was very similar to that first project. It was there's a private university here called St. Edward's University, and they needed a new office for their marketing department, and it was in a traditional 1880s building. So we did their office interior, and we designed all the desks and everything. And the thing we did that was interesting there that they let us do was, as you walked in, the reception space has this wall that we made out of 8,000 number 2 pencils. We bought a bunch of pencils of different colors and shades, and one of the people that worked for me at the time, God bless them, they took panels of masonite and spent weeks gluing up these pencils on these boards, and then we put it up as panelized, so the entire office as you walk in is pencils, and it makes a beautiful pattern on the wall, and worked its way into the rest of the space. So that was kind of our kickoff project there, and we got more work from we've done 2 buildings for St. Edward's University since then, and I think we slowly worked our way up from there as well.
What about like larger scale stuff like towers and things? Is that do you take on those, or are you able to be the architect of record, or do you need to staff up for that kind of project?
If you're a client or a developer, please come to us. We would be very happy to do a tower or anything you come up with. So it's just hard to, when people, especially universities now, like we tried to get work with the University of Texas, but their vetting process is so strict that you have to have done, 20 buildings of the same type at large universities to even be considered. So it's hard. If you haven't done tons of one type of building before, to be allowed to do that is getting more and more difficult. So yeah,
we hear the same.
Yeah, we would love it.
We hear the same thing from everybody who's interested in. I think most architects are interested in a diverse, type of projects. To your point, not all, but I think a lot of them are. But it is becoming more difficult, exactly like you said, and it's a bit unfortunate. I understand it from the client's end, but also it's a bit unfortunate, there's no like kind of faith or the magic like we were talking about before.
It actually reminds me of in San Francisco, there is like a small business program that actually I think forces or somewhat requires big offices who want to do projects in the city to partner with a small local office. And that's a
Wow.
good way for, like smaller firms to get involved into, working on a different typology that they could never get because they don't have that kind of portfolio. And
Yeah, that's a great
I feel like
program.
that's a program that should be, in like all the major cities, just to be able to bridge that gap and
help prevent a monopolization too.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that would be nice. I mean, back in the day, it used to be competitions. There were a lot more competitions for things. And there was even, maybe it still exists, Competitions Magazine, where it would just list all of the competitions you could enter for, doing buildings all over the world. And I know that's, Big got their start that way. Bjark Ingels got competition. I think in Europe maybe it still happens more, but you could be a very small firm and win a competition, and that's your launching point. But those don't. I don't see them anymore, so I don't know. Maybe there are, but you don't see as many.
No, they're super common in Europe, but in the United States not so much. And one of the last guests we had on maybe a year or so ago are European architects, and they do win most of their work through competitions. And of course, they have plenty to say about the negatives of like it costs us so much money for these big ones. And I guess the briefs, the competitions now, they don't just want conceptual renderings and plans; they want
everything.
Like SDDD level completion.
Oh, wow.
And they're like, we just can't do that. I mean, they get paid, but it covers like a fraction of their operating costs to do the kind of work. What about, so have you partnered with other offices to be that architect of record or the architect that has that massive portfolio, or would you partner with another office?
We would definitely do it, and we have done it on smaller scales. We did it was interesting. In Austin, there was a program. They wanted to expand the convention center here, and so they had a staged kind of design process where they had conceptual architects to do an initial presentation, but it was structured so weirdly that when you did that initial presentation, if you were those architects, you were excluded from any further stages of the project, which didn't make any sense to me. But we teamed up with another local firm, Mark Odom Studio, and we did a lot of conceptual design for that. So that was good. And then on the Indeed projects, we were more like we acted as the design eye for Indeed doing their offices, but we teamed up with various larger offices to do more of the CD work and to develop the design. So we did a lot of that as well. So yeah, we have no problem teaming up to do varying scale projects.
Yeah. It's a cool partnership when it works out well and if everyone's on the same page, of course. If not, then it's not great. Oh shoot, what was my question? Oh, I did want to talk about the Stealth House because we talked about that I think maybe before the recording started.
Right.
And since this is a video, we can always stick in images as we're talking about it. But the Stealth House and also the CS2, the Case Study 2.0 program. So but the Stealth House is done. it's a real house to build.
Yeah, I've been living in it for almost a year now. So yes, it's done, and it's amazing. It was a process that not many architects get to have, I think, where our office has always operated with having experimental projects on the side. Just things we like to do that we know are more for publicity, but also for just getting these things out of our system. So the one that got a lot of attention, kind of went viral years ago, was the Zero House, where it was probably before the small house movement kind of took off, but it was this house you would just plop down anywhere, and it had photovoltaics and water collection and did everything and ran itself. Got a lot of attention. It actually got sponsored by DuPont, picked it up for an ad campaign. They said, it was like, here's the house of the future kind of thing. So we never got to build one because it was very, very expensive. We got it priced with some developers and never actually got to build one. So the Stealth House that I'm living in started that way. It started as just a fun competition. It was started, honestly, a few years ago when their political situation in the U.S. started to deteriorate a bit. And it was like, okay, so we want to design a house as an oasis that could go anywhere and be, secure, almost like a little fortress. And it really played back into old Roman house types, and lots of cultures have the typical house wasn't what Americans are used to, with windows on the perimeter. It had no windows on the perimeter, and everything happened interior. But how do you update that idea as opposed to every private room looking into a central courtyard where you can look at each other? Is there a way you can configure that with multiple smaller courtyards where every room looks into its own private garden space? And that's what we did. So, we had this project floating around the office, and when people would get a couple hours here or there, they would do a rendering and things. And at the time I was looking, I would every once in a while glance at MLS just to see what properties are available. And I was kind of fascinated with these, what I call scrap lands projects. They're kind of, parcels that are next to highways that nobody wants because it's noisy and, inconvenient to get to. And you'd often find those really cheap because, nobody wanted to live there. And so I found one of those properties that happened to be in a great location. It was just an ADU lot. So only accessible by a gravel alley that ran behind the main house. And in Austin, there's some odd codes where you can actually parcel this off as a condo unit and buy a backyard of someone. Oh. So that's what we did. We bought this backyard, and, thinking it sat for a long time as just, it's a great piece of property. I'll figure out what to do with it. And then slowly thought, okay, this might be a great place for this house because it has no views. The property had no views on any side. You're just looking at the side of or the back of another house or the alley. And what if we just turned everything internally? And so we were limited to 1,100 square feet as an ADU as well. So that gave us a size to work with there. And I said, now's the time. I am getting to the age where I'm either going to build my own house or not. And went ahead and did it. And, I was recently married at the time too. So, my wife is she put a lot of faith to say that, because to build something like this, you have lots and lots of people telling you there's no resale value. Yeah, you're sinking your money into something that is going to be just a giant waste. It was nerve-wracking, quite honestly, because you're building a windowless house on a gravel alley that has no official address. And, it's a totally internally focused things, which I had never lived in a space like that. So it could be claustrophobic or awful, so we were nervous the whole time building this. It's like, okay, it's cool to look at it going up, but living here day to day, is it going to be just, are we going to go crazy? And we've been here a year so far, and it's been amazing. Honestly, it's like you walk in that, from the outside, and it's like you're in a completely different world. And we have lots of, we have a beautiful olive tree that's growing in the courtyard, and that can only survive because of the microclimate we have here around it, because olives, it gets cold here and freezes in the winters. So they need protection from the cold, but we can grow an olive tree. And it is almost like you're in a little Mediterranean, capsule here in the middle of Austin. So it worked out well, and it's been getting a lot of attention. I'm glad to see, and we've had some inquiries into, people wanting their own version of this.
Interesting.
It sounds like a little sci-fi house, to be honest. Like a different.
It kind of is. The exterior is all corrugated Corten steel, and that's pretty much it. On the back and two sides, that's all you get, other than a fire escape door, which we have a tricky. People can't quite figure it out at first, but you do have a direct access to the exterior from every bedroom. It's a steel door that's then covered by this curtain you see behind me. That the fire escape is behind there, so you can get out of every room directly, but it's protected from the outside. So you have on three sides, it's that, and then the front has a little bit more. It's got a front door and a garage door, and between them is this art panel that we put Bisatsa glass tiles, and it's sort of the one moment of expression on the exterior. But otherwise, it's a box.
I mean, the idea of a kind of let's say a windowless house and kind of a more inverted house is very interesting, because you mentioned, well, we don't have views, so why have windows if you have no views to anything? I mean, even in, like, let's say LA, you have windows on the side yards to look at what, like, your neighbor's fence, like,
exactly my point.
It is mostly for light and air requirements, but maybe like there is another way to think about how to provide that without the old ways. So it is very interesting.
Yeah, no, I even thought that when I was a little kid growing up in suburban Florida. It's like we had 5-foot setbacks on the side. So our side windows were always had blinds down. They were never opened ever. And so it was sort of like, why are we building these houses next to each other in a suburban setting? I think what we've done with the stealth house here, it makes a lot more sense. And yeah, it really does. If we're going to have single family houses, I think this is a new way to go.
What was my question? So you mentioned that in the office you've always had these kind of I don't know how you phrase it, but side projects that are a bit, you get to flex your design muscles and get it out, as you said, which I love that way of expressing it, because I often feel the same way. Did that take the form of other houses like the stealth house, in the sense that it was not for a specific client, and you're doing projects, I guess for yourself is one way to do it, but you're just doing projects without a specific client?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what they are, is done without a client. Or we have a client that we're working on a different project for, and we do it for them and just say, hey, here's something fun to look at, kind of thing. So we're doing one of those right now for a restaurant. And I had this crazy idea for a new type of restaurant, and they were like, yeah, show it to us, we'll be glad to look at it. So you don't go into it with the expectation that anything's going to come of it, other than your own gratification. But it's another good way to exercise your brain in ways that you may not get in practice.
I've been thinking about that recently because of the Case Study 2.0 program, which, as you know, we participated in, and everyone, designed a house for a faceless user, more or less.
Right.
And it's not easy to do that because it does take resources, but there are a lot of personal, there's a lot of personal satisfaction that comes from it, like you're describing, and also maybe you reach a broader audience because it's someone could buy it. And it's a very different way of working as an architect, because traditionally, to work as an architect, you need a client, and you have a contract that gets signed, and then you ask them questions, and they say, okay, this is my site, this is what I want, and then you roll in that direction. But to do a project without those parameters is a very freeing thing, and it maybe opens a door too for folks who are clients who are interested in architecture but don't want to spend the time doing a custom one. They can buy something that's kind of been designed solely by the auteur. It's not tampered with or muddied at all. It's exactly whatever the architect wanted, and there's definitely some beauty in that as a process and for the end product, I think.
Yeah, I do like it as a model like that. I mean, we have looked into the permitting ramifications of just taking an off-the-shelf design and building it, and it's more difficult than it might seem from a legal standpoint. It's you really do have to get into site modification and planning, and so it ends up taking a lot of time. It's not as easy as just selling a set of plans. And I see other architects selling sets of plans. I don't quite understand how it works, because our lawyers all told us, don't do that. You can't do that, because you have to show that you have given some consideration to the site and all this kind of thing. You open yourself to a lot of problems otherwise. So, some people have come to us with this, they want to build a stealth house, but they only want to pay, $1,000 for the set of plans and take it from there. And we're like, well, you can't really do that. It doesn't work that way.
Zeros short.
But I do think it gives people ideas, and you can say, well, we will customize it, take the same ideas, but apply them to your specific site and, for you.
The legal aspects is a really, really good point. So and I know for I don't know what our other architects are doing with the case study program, but I know for us, I've not really thought about it. It's funny because we phrase it as if all of us are selling our plans, for pre-designed house, but that's actually not exactly what's happening, right? It's more like services, because I've actually not even thought about the idea of just literally just selling off the plans and not being involved for permitting or CA. I don't. It's not really what we do, so I've just not even thought about that. But yeah, you're right. I've seen architects who are literally selling plans, and
they must have some airtight disclaimers on those. That's all I can figure.
Probably.
So,
well, I mean, they're selling conceptual plans probably more than they are selling CDs. But for us, and I know for you guys as well, that's not our MO. And I have a lot of reservations about an average person just taking a set of conceptual plans, like the ones for JFK or whatever, and then just going out there and finding a builder and doing it, right? There's going to be a lot of problems.
You would have to not really care about what the final product is.
I agree.
And, there are a lot of architects who don't. They just are doing it for, to produce a set of drawings, and then they would rather wash their hands of it. So I think there are different kinds of architects out there. Yeah,
I forget that's the case. I'm only friends with.
I'm not all good ones.
It's one of the curses of being an architect is you care too much about this stuff, and so when something goes wrong and the contractor is like, "Well, that'll cost this much," and the client doesn't want to pay it, and you're like, "Are we going to pay this out of our pocket just to get it to look right?"
Yeah.
You kind of get into that mode sometimes. It's like it's hard to resist.
It's a slippery slope. That one is super dangerous.
It really is. It can go on and on and on. But
would you ever? I know you're living in the South House, but would you ever, as an office, develop your own projects? Like be a developer?
Oh, be a developer. Yeah. If the economy is different right now, it's too risky. It's just the real estate market is wacky right now, and especially in Austin, it's not great. So potentially, given how things are going, it would be fun, but not at the moment.
Did you have a tough time when you first started in Austin finding good contractors? Are they hard to come by in Austin? I'm not familiar with the landscape there.
No, Austin is one of the weirdest cities you've ever seen in terms of architecture and construction. It has, and this comes from living in New York and practicing in New York forever and doing projects all over the country. It has probably the highest density of truly great architects of anywhere in the country. And a lot of people don't know that, but man, you see the stuff that's entered into for the AI awards here every year, and it blows you away. I'm on juries for other AI awards, and it's like not even close for other cities. And it's kind of an unknown thing, and I'm not even sure why it happened. I mean, we do have UT School of Architecture here, but I don't think that accounts for how that happened. So the AI Homes Tour is coming up in October, and it gets 5,000 people touring houses. It's a big event in Austin. I don't know of any other cities that have that big a homes tour kind of thing. So it really is a strange city that seems to love architecture. And so builders, the original question you asked, there are a lot of great builders here, and their names are known by every architect. And it always comes down to the cost, because they're going to just cost more than others. So there's always that talk with the client is like, okay, you can hire so-and-so and they're going to be 20% more, but you get this and this and this for it, and you work your way down the list on that.
Yeah. You get security now also because they know, or that it's going to turn out well, as opposed to rolling the dice. The final question we always like to ask is, what is your favorite building? And it could be one of your own. It doesn't have to be.
Do people answer that question?
They do. We made the mistake. Marina made the mistake once of asking a guest, do you have a favorite building? And if so, what is it? And they were like, I do not. So we don't ask that. Now the question is, what is your favorite building?
Well, just to give the listeners, a glimpse into your process, you did not give me this ahead of time to think about it.
We intentionally do not give guests any questions.
God, that is such a hard question, honestly. And I hate to go into, things that are predictable. I'd like to come up with something that's like not really thought about very much. That's a little bit different. I mean, there are some obvious ones I like. I love Lucan stuff, and so I can list off a bunch of those. I would say for all right, I'll give you something weird. One of the architects I remember very early on, probably 15 years ago, we did a road trip around the country just to look at all of the Bruce Goff houses that were still existent. And I went with Louise Hartman at the time we went, and we got into a lot of people. We knocked on a bunch of doors, and people were perfectly willing to let us in to look at these spaces. And then Shinnencon, which was in Bartlesville and burned down, was burned down by arson, was one of the most incredible buildings I've ever seen. And it came from this just crazy use of materials that you would never, ever imagine. Like one of the reasons it burned so quickly, the exterior cladding was anthracite coal. It's
What?
like, who would think of doing this? It's like, yeah, but it was interspersed with blue cullet glass, which is the stuff they scrape off the bottom of glass kilns at factories. And then the windows were these stained glass looking windows, but they were made by buying beads, glass beads at Woolworths and gluing them onto the window panes. It took them 2 years to do these windows at this house. But the entire house was that kind of insane inventiveness that was not appreciated by a lot of people, I'm sure. Yeah. But, I think that kind of architecture, there's something fascinating and appealing about that level of idiosyncrasy. Mm-hmm. And, if you force me to name a favorite building, it would probably be, I would just lump all of Bruce Goff's work into that one category there. I just love that stuff. It unfortunately, not much of it exists anymore because it was easy for people to see this weird house and tear it down to build something else. And there was not a preservation movement that would look at a Bruce Goff house and say, oh, yes, this is deserving of, classic mid-century modern status or anything like that. So most of it's gone. But one of the few architectures that I've walked into and your breath is just taken away by how insane it is.
That's a great answer. I love it. I love it. Scott, thank you so much for making the time on a Friday. This was so much fun.
Very fun.
And we certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion, feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching and see you next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.